If you are a fan of epic fantasy romance where the emotional stakes are kept just as high as the physical battles, then you have hopefully crossed paths with the Kingmaker Chronicles by Amanda Bouchet, or you should. I read the 3 core books about Cat and Griffin and devoured those of late, and going to dig into that series, some of my thoughts, dissecting the romance, the world building, the audiobook that I used to devour the series, etc. I did know when I read it that there were 3 core books and that there were others in the series, and I had mistakenly thought that they continued the story of those 2 characters. But I did, when going in to do my Goodreads review, find out that the additional books are, or at least appear to be, supporting the other pairings within the supporting cast to have their own adventures and complete their journeys into romance and expand the world. So I have devoured the main portion of this. I'd love to come back and take a look at some of those things for the other characters, but I'm not going to, and that's not part of this review. So this is a series that is regularly sitting on Romantasy recommendation lists as a foundational example of what the modern Romantasy genre is. And I decided to dive in as part of my mission to read more, and the fact that I have always wanted to be a spicy books girl and never given myself permission to do so until now. So therefore, this was one of the ones that I wanted to dive into pretty quickly. I know the big one is, of course, Sarah J. Maas, and I will get to that, but I also have my own projects, and I need something that's not quite so wrap you up, take you over as a Kotar seems to be. When I say that I devoured this series, I mean it completely took over my life, my thoughts, and my routine for several days. It stole many, many hours of sleep when I had laid in the dark for hours and just was completely transported away to Thelyria and the various countries within, and swept up in Cat and Griffin. It was something that, because I did it as an audiobook, was incredibly immersive. I was able to carry with me through my chores, or I found myself lingering in the car to finish a chapter or get through at least a high-end beat before I went inside. I always wanted to steal more time with this book. Now let's dive into why I think this series works so well, where it hits some friction points for me, and how the narrative structure functions from both a reader's perspective and a writer's perspective, because that's something that I want to share with you, my perspective as a writer. Let's start with the central pillar of the entire narrative, which means that we're going to talk about the main character, Cat. To be completely honest, Cat's a character I found both deeply fascinating and at times incredibly annoying. At the beginning of A Promise of Fire, her defensive walls and her sheer unyielding stubbornness almost made me want to stop listening to the book entirely, and yet she was so snarky that I had to keep going. And so I will credit the author for giving her a lot that she's got to get over in the book, and you come to like her as she comes to like herself more. But she has a lot to handle. She pushes people away. She makes reckless decisions based on fear, and her immediate reaction to any kind of help is to bite. As a reader, that can be a hard barrier to cross. Like I said, I found it to be worth it. But as a writer, I completely understand it. I can look at that choice and see that Amanda Bouchet, what she was doing there. If a character starts out already perfectly reasonable, they have nowhere to go during the journey of a story. And Cat's growth over the course of the 3 books is significant, and more importantly, it feels mostly earned. Her stubbornness can be annoying, but it's also her armor against a lot of trauma and the only way that she's survived her past, and so it is validated as part of her character. For me, one of the major metrics that I judge a book by is whether or not I end up counting the characters as my friends because I've invested them, I've worried about them. And then this book really succeeded in that metric. When I was transitioning between book 2 and 3 in the audiobooks, I ran into a little bit of a snag getting a hold of the third book, as the library apps did not, any one of them, I use Libby, Overdrive, and Hoopla, have the entire series available on audio. So I had to actually utilize all 3 of them to be able to read the 3 books in the series. And so I had a bit of a delay getting a hold of the third book, and the second night I was so frustrated and anxious because I had friends that were in the middle of a story and I needed to get back to them and help them finish their journey by finishing their book. And that is just a hallmark of excellent character work, when their absence leaves you physically itching in your day-to-day life. Since I did take these in as an audiobook, I wanted to talk about the audio production itself, as that tends to create a major impression on how the characters land on you. Mia Barron, the performer, was truly excellent overall. She carried a massive, sprawling epic fantasy on her own 2 vocal cords, and it's an incredible feat of endurance and talent because there's a huge cast of characters here. But as the hours did roll on, I found myself thinking about how nice it would be to hear this story produced as either a dual narration or a full cast audio. Specifically, having a true male voice for Griffin would have heightened the depth and breadth of the entire performance so much. Because the story is told entirely from Cat's perspective and it's a first-person perspective, Mia's tasked with delivering all the male dialogue. To separate Griffin and his brothers from the rest of the cast, she does lean into this gruff and gravelly tone, which is how it's described in the book. Unfortunately, some of the specific choices end up drifting into a space that feels kind of childish. And so anytime that Griffin was doing something that might have been a mildly unfair thing, holding a double standard, especially something about the way that those lines were delivered came across as very childish, that undermined the age of the character. It was a strange friction because Griffin is denotated as being at least a decade older than Cat in the second book. She's described as being 24 in the second book, and that he was either 34 or 36. So he is significantly older than her, and those moments where I felt like Griffin suddenly became 12 to 17, very jarring. That would be my main thing, that, diving into this world via audio is great. There was so much depth to the performance, the narration that was there. There's no sound effects. It is just a audio narration, and it's great. I still would find it to be chef's kiss if we could get this as a full cast audio. Then let's look at the romance. The dynamic between Cat and Griffin is, to put it elegantly, I hope, a juicy piece of steak. It is thick, it's got substance, and it is exactly what you want to sink your teeth into, especially if you like a kind of primalish man, a dominant man. So their connection is very hard won. For as dominant as he is, he completely respects her autonomy and her need to choose to be in the relationship. He is absolutely certain that she is the one for him, and yet he waits for her entirely. Part of what makes the relationship work so well on the page is that you get the working together and bleeding together before they ever get to enjoy their relationship. And then also their arguments are interesting in the book. Every couple is going to disagree about things, and this couple spends a lot of time that is focused, instead of on simple misunderstandings, petty jealousies, those kind of things, most of their time is spent on big, deep existential questions. Do they truly believe in one another? Who was actually made for who? Can a relationship survive destiny forcing their hand together? And I appreciate that choice by an author. That's one of the things that I do not enjoy in romance that a lot of other people do. I don't want relationship betrayal. I don't want cheating. I want the couple to come together and believe in their ability to be together. And Griffin especially does that the entire way through this series, and he wins a place in my heart. There are, a million external threats in the world, and yet the story really embraces that their internal trust is the ultimate battlefield. And it makes a huge deal out of whether or not they can look each other in the eye and choose to be vulnerable over the self-preservation that has especially allowed Cat to survive her traumatic life. So as the pieces started falling into place and we move into the climax, I realized part of why the author spent so much time hammering home that theme of emotional trust. It was all set up, and she's building towards the couple having a foundation strong enough to withstand the final heartbreaking test at the end of the trilogy. And it would not have worked if you did not know Cat inside and out, know how much she longs for his happiness. And I'm very glad that the setup was a lie for the great issue in the story, and that our characters do, of course, find their happy ever after. It's a romance series. They have to. But I really saw a path where you could deny the characters that, and I would understand why, and that was heart-wrenching. Then let's look at the world building. So the story made me confront some of my own internal judgment. When I first started the series, I realized that the setting was built directly around the Greek pantheon, and my inner hipster immediately flared up. I caught myself thinking, oh great, somebody's just plopped some Zeus and Poseidon and Hades into a fantasy world, and it's kind of cheesy, can be overdone. But as I watched the story unfold, the complete world building fully justified their presence in this world. And by the time you reach the resolution, the narrative has explained exactly why this world is tied to those specific deities, and how the fact that we carry knowledge of them into that world is a thing. Then it definitely was not the lazy copy-paste job that can happen when we reuse real-world pantheons or people in fictional stories. And so A+ on that. Looking at it all through a writer's lens, I realized that there is an actual brilliance to doing this. By borrowing figures that the audience already knows and are intimately familiar with, we get to establish a narrative shorthand right from the beginning. We already know who Persephone is. We understand the domains of Hades and Poseidon, and when Cerberus is lurking, you don't need explained that this is a big scary creature with 3 heads, even though, the 3 heads part is definitely explained. You know the significance of him, of the Olympians, etc. Then because we as readers carry that knowledge over automatically, our author doesn't need to waste a bunch of space on the exposition to explain the pantheon, and frees up space for the more detailed world building of the political landscape and, of course, the characters. And this is an incredibly character-driven series. The mythology ends up acting as a bedrock, allowing the immortal kingdoms, the magic, and the character arcs to take center stage. And as soon as I stopped being a hipster about it and allowed myself to be a fangirl, I realized just how much I loved the familiarity, as it allowed me to slide into the world with ease while leaving plenty of room for surprises. Then one of the other strengths in the series is that it shines in its handling of the expanded supporting cast. So Amanda Bouchet manages a massive amount of characters, and she does it with great skill. When we start A Promise of Fire, we are introduced to 2 entirely different character squads, the Circus and Beta team. And as a writer, I was watching the structural pacing very closely during these early chapters with the Circus, and noting that she spent a lot of time letting us get to know the circus performers in intricate detail, even though the synopsis told me that she is going to be taken away from these characters, that the narrative treating the Circus family with the immense weight and respect made me understand that these were people that were not just disposable background characters, and that the author was making them memorable because they are promised to return at some point. I am supposed to hold them into my mind. I am supposed to care about them, and that's the point of giving me all this detail about them. Then once that promised capture happens, Beta Team and Griffin become our absolute bread and butter for the rest of the series. So when Cat and Griffin are not entirely alone in a room, which usually means they're having fun time, the members of Beta Team are right there with them, anchoring the scene. I found myself falling in love with each of them in the same pattern and manner that Cat does. So they go on to become her family. And I think that the reader's relationship with the supporting cast mirrors Cat's so well because the first person narration is so distinct and tells you exactly why to love them. And I don't find that it double talks very much. Cat's got this layer of truth in everything that she does because that's part of her magic. She detects lies. Well, she ends up lying a fair bit and a lot to herself, but her internal dialogue is very obvious when she's self-deluding, and so you don't look at a character and go, oh, why does she like that character when they actually do this? No, she's actually more likely to be, I like this character and I'm trying to tell myself that I don't and I shouldn't. And so you already like them by the time she has decided that she likes them. Then the author just really understands how to make a character pop from the very beginning. In the second book, we are introduced very rapidly to some powerful, important people, and you may have heard their names once or twice, but she does a great job of very quickly telling you exactly who they are so that you can care about them in the stakes of the final battle. The only time I had any problem with tracking characters was most likely my own fault. I was listening to A Promise of Fire, and I'm pretty sure there's a point at which I fell asleep for an entire chapter and did not realize that I had missed that chapter because I then woke up and did 10 more. And so it wasn't until much later in the story that I realized that I had missed something major. And if I had had the physical book, I'd have gone back and just read that chapter, but I didn't want to retread that ground in audio, and the searching is a little harder. I feel like it reroutes your brain, and I didn't want to do that to myself. So I just let the story inform me in context to what I missed, and it was all strong enough to carry me through that attention gap that I gave myself. For the magic system, it has a very interesting crunchy dichotomy to it. So the majority of the world sees magic as being pretty rules-based. It's got a system that's, established but has room to flex under pressure, but it does not bend. Healers don't suddenly start spewing fire, etc. And yet at the center of this very firm system is Cat. And she's got a wide variety of fairly hard magic abilities. Her ability to tell the truth, for example, she can turn invisible, but then she's got this big squishy, ultimately limitless power that she has to learn how to use by taking the limitations off herself, by dismantling her own inner psychological limitations, that her trauma is her only true boundary. And I love systems that understand this because from my perspective as both a storyteller and a sorceress, that this is how magic really functions. There are rules and structures and boundaries that are all about being training wheels. They are there to guide you and teach you and force your mind to see the world in a new way. But then once you become wise enough, powerful enough to realize that intent and words are the true fabric of reality, that they really do shape everything that we monkeys experience, then the training wheels come off and everything is open to you. And that is Cat's experience as she goes through this. So watching her transition from the rigid fear of her old life to the infinite terrifying potential of her true power is a character arc that is worth tracking to me because it rings true. Then as some of my final thoughts here, when I look at the trilogy as a complete unit, I have to look at, my own preferences to make sure that I'm not being biased. I'm someone who loves a great introduction and origin, but I'm also a sucker for the resolution. I love seeing how threads finally tie together and that my brain can finally rest because it's resolved. Because of that bias, the third book in the series is almost always my personal favorite. But with the Kingmaker Chronicles, A Breath of Fire, the second book, actually takes the crown for me. So book 2 is where we get to see the most profound character growth. It's where we get to walk with Cat and Griffin through the absolute heart of their relationship journey. In this trilogy, we struggled a little bit with the romance not feeling stagnant, but it had nowhere to go. We had already, by the end of book 2, established that these two are devoted to one another, and that the only reason that we have wobbles and doubts and such in the final book is because of the gods jabbering and giving more information than either of them needed, as well as separation. And those things can get kind of tiring. So while I loved their romance, the third book was a little bit of, well, we've already tread that ground for me. Then when you're looking for the peak of the emotional journey, that obviously has to go to the end of the series. It has the most gut-wrenching, emotionally devastating scenes as Cat is finally lied to in life, because nobody has ever lied to her, and once they trick her, the deceit is just so complete, thorough, heart-wrenching. I, as a reader, was sitting there going, oh no, I mean, I understand why you could make that decision, but that can't be the way we end this. That can't be the way we end this. How are we going to fix this? And it fixed it for me. So it was good. It had me fully invested. And then for the most enjoyable, pure entertainment value, book 1, A Promise of Fire, was certainly the funniest and most lighthearted of the three, balancing some looming political stakes with a lot of great comedic banter and a team of people that you feel like are truly friends. So wrapping all of this up, I do highly recommend this series, particularly for readers who enjoy spicy romantasy. This series does deliver full explicit sex scenes, but it delivers them with the internal polished prose of a traditional romance novel. And what I mean by that is the physical mechanics are present on this page. They do have the occasional P or C, but the writing still heavily utilizes the classic romance vocabulary. You're going to see phrases like warm sex and towering heat guiding the emotional tone of these scenes. Since exploring high spice romantasy has been a major focus of my reading journey lately, and that this was considered a classic example of romantasy and spicy romantasy, I can see why it holds that title, and it definitely deserves the reputation. If I have one critique, it's that the central romance occasionally relies a little bit too heavily on tropes of destiny and fate. When the story explicitly says that these two were meant to be together, it can sometimes undercut the narrative tension. You know that failure isn't an option, and if it is an option, it is because of Cat's own bullheaded stubbornness, and that is an unacceptable thing for a main character to do, in my opinion. But I am very much we're going to be here and we're going to be devoted the whole time kind of person. Then I wanted to share that even if you stripped out every single ounce of spice from this story, the central question of the world would still have kept me hooked. How on earth is this deeply traumatized, fiercely defensive woman going to become someone who could carry the weight of her crushing destiny with any kind of grace? Because she had definitely abandoned the grace. And that is really important to me. I don't just want spice thrown into a mediocre story. I want something that is sweeping and integrated, and the fact that we have spice just simply deepens the character growth or tells you a lot about the reality and vulgarness of the world. And this hits all of those points very well. All right. Well, I hope that was informational for everybody, and I will be back with more soon. Bye.
Sing a new song, all the old ones won't do. Get rid of the sadness that's been living in